Hello, and thanks for watching another Sunday case study. This week I'm looking at the hands of Beyonce Knowles. That's right, last week we were looking at Camilla Parker Bowles, and now we're looking at Beyonce Knowles. I don't know why that is relevant. Now, when I was looking for images here, I couldn't find anything with any great clarity. It's all very blurry. But, I've got something here. I've taken a few notes. This isn't really going to be a palm reading for predicting anything in her future, but I will be talking about what I can see in the hands in terms of character, skills, and traits. And, I have to say, look how terrible this image is. It's so poor, such poor quality. At first, I was, you know, I sort of weighed everything up in my mind, and I thought, this is such a complex lady. There are two layers to her that, well, there's more than that. Two that I've identified that really sort of contradict each other. And at times she is so utterly driven and ambitious and self-absorbed in her career and her next move that she comes across as very selfish. And then there are these impulsive moments of extreme generosity that seems to just sort of come out of nowhere. And I think to those that don't know her or understand her, which is probably most people, there isn't any sort of rhyme or reason to this. I'm going to explain how I've come to these conclusions with what I've seen in her hands. So, first things first, this image is a little bit different to this one because this one, this is probably the best one I've got. Really, she is an intuitive hand first and foremost. But here's where I was deceived. Notice the thumb here. It seems to be sort of, not low set, not high set, but it does seem to be sort of quite narrowly tucked in. And here as well, it's sort of, parallel, adjacent to the palm in a way that's kind of almost sort of claw-like. The skin appears very taut as well. And the thumb as well, like don't like the term particularly, but it is sort of so pointed that that narrow angle suggests someone who is narrow-minded and someone who is quite sort of closed off in feeling and selfish, essentially. But, and here's the big but, when we look at this image here, we can see that that's not actually the case. There is an ability to flex that thumb out, and actually, it's not as high set as it sort of first appears. And although this is a terrible image in terms of quality, the fingers here really show us just how strong of a personality she is. And just look at the strength of Jupiter here, that ambition, and those abilities to understand herself and great self-awareness and a great ability to make those decisions, be authoritative, and her confidence as well. It's not as what you might expect. Notice how it doesn't really, again, it's a terrible image, isn't it? But look, it only just reaches past this line and it's not really even halfway. It sort of just reaches halfway, that first phalanx of Saturn. And this really shows us someone who is, I wouldn't say all that confident. It's almost as though she's putting on a facade. She's playing a role. And this is what I mean. There's some layers here. She's a very complex person. She likely understands herself well enough to know that she doesn't have the confidence to do what she has to do, so she has to play a role to do it. The Apollo finger appears to be only just longer than Jupiter, perhaps. Hard to sort of tell, isn't it, really? In this image, it looks pretty even. And really, this is a sign of fame in palmistry because the Jupiter finger is our ability to uh, govern our own thoughts about ourselves and our abilities. This is our ability. So if it's the same height, then we have a good idea, a good understanding of what we're capable of. And this is why it's one of the signs of fame in palmistry. So she's very level-headed in that respect. But initially, when I looked at this hand, I couldn't help but think, it's quite sort of narrow. It's thin, it's taut, it's very long, it's very slender, and with this, very sort of closed off thumb, I couldn't help but think, well, is this an egocentric, intuitive mix? But having, reevaluated, I've now come to the conclusion that she's much more an intuitive hand than anything else. There's certainly some slight egocentric qualities there. There is some selfishness there. And this is why it's so complicated, because there's also an impulsive and strength of feeling as well. So I'll just break it down. The low-lying heart line is a sign of someone who has something of a naivety about them. They are potentially going to succumb to their feeling before thinking. So if they come across someone who is down on their luck, they're just inclined to help rather than think logically, well, maybe this is a trap, maybe this is a scam. So that's something of a flaw as well as a strength, really, in my opinion. It's a strength more than anything because it's a strength of character. In other words, it's a sign of compassion, the low-lying heart line. But, it is the but, the heart line, it's got a really natural, gentle, very organic and healthy, essentially emotionally healthy framework, um, very healthy sexual, psychological framework as well. The curvature is really nice and healthy. I don't see any kind of major defects. Again, I've not really got clarity of an image here, but it doesn't reach over into, I'd like to see this reach over a little bit further onto Jupiter, because a heart line that reaches up to Saturn, and this, just about reaches in between, but not quite enough. A heart line that reaches onto Saturn and Saturn alone is a sign of selfishness in palmistry. A heart line that reaches right over onto Jupiter is someone who is highly idealistic. So she has a very measured approach in terms of ethics, but it's just a little bit self-centered. Now, this is the left hand. When we look at the right hand, again, terrible quality of image here. But it does appear to, again, just about almost reach between Jupiter and Saturn, but not quite enough. So perhaps there was some, I'm kind of surmising a little bit here because I don't really have the clarity to make a concrete conclusion. But perhaps there was some lacking of guidance when she was young. And on that note, this is, I feel, quite an important one. Notice the gaps in between uh, Jupiter and Saturn, as well as Mercury and Apollo at the base of the fingers. This is almost always seen in water hands. She is undoubtedly a water hand, a long arm and long fingers. Water hands are prone to coping mechanisms with the intense sensitivity that they have and that awareness about them. They often find it very difficult and struggle in life and get by with these coping mechanisms of having unhealthy relationships with food. And this is something that Beyonce might well have. As well as that, touching back on a lack of possible guidance when she was young, there may well have been a lacking of a father figure as well, potentially. There's something of a space here but seen between Saturn and Jupiter. It's not major, but there is something there, and it looks certainly that way on the right hand here. Now, for someone who is considered a modern goddess of beauty, a modern equivalent to the goddess Venus, if you like, I find it ironic that the lifeline hugs the Venus mount, tightly reducing the capacity for desire, which means that in fact she has a relatively low sex drive for someone who is quite obviously a sex symbol herself. find the majority of what I'm seeing about this sign is quite sad, really, because she probably only has a few, I mean, literally one or two friends, real that she considers as actual friends. Her social network is very small. The space seen between the life and the headline, there's a gap here. This makes her a tiger woman. She has the mark of a tiger in Tibetan palmistry, someone who leaps before they think. Now, this combined with this low-lying heart line and a headline that, it delves quite deeply into a well-developed amount of lunar. You can see it even though it's a terrible image. It's a well-developed amount of lunar. This headline is um, plunging into it, essentially. These are unrealistic thoughts, highly imaginative, highly active imagination. She's a daydreamer. She is constantly wrapped up in unrealistic and potentially dark thoughts as well. And so she's prone to depression. This is another very common water hand trait. I wouldn't say anxiety at all. That's something that I don't see in this hand at all, but there is something of depression. Now, the fact that she's a tiger, um, she has that mark of the tiger, combined with something of naivety as well as, I don't see it so much on the left hand, it's more on the right hand, which actually shows us that she is highly imaginative in a much more practical way. It's a much straighter headline on the left hand. It appears to be anyway. It is still sloping. So that sort of leavens that unrealistic thinking a little bit, but there still is a propensity towards depression. Now, the naivety here, that urge and sense of that greater kind of capacity of feeling, and that need to sort of help others, that open-mindedness that we see here by the large space between the head and the heart line, shows us, as well as this impulsive behavior, shows us at times a real kind of erratic, impulsive acts of charitable behavior, seemingly out of nowhere. So she's a very complex person because she's constantly thinking about her next move. She is very tactical in her career. Notice the Jupiter finger on her right hand. Again, right hand is more practical, environmental, physical. It's more about the career and what we do in the real world, if you like, the external. Notice how the Jupiter finger is leaning in towards this thumb. Now, this pincer-like kind of gesture that's very unconscious is a sign of someone who who needs to make change and influence to quite literally, you know, pick things up and move them around, change the world around her. Jupiter leans towards her thumb, her decision-making, ambition, authority, traits are relying on her personality, arguably her most dominant feature. So she's constantly thinking about, this is quite a long thumb, she's a deep thinker, she's constantly thinking about her career moves and the next strategic step. What should I do next and how should I do it? She's constantly planning and campaigning her own career. So she's very self-absorbed in that way. Not selfish, but she's self-absorbed. That's what makes her quite complicated, quite complex, because on the outside looking in, I think a lot of people who are around her, who are close to her, who work with her, might well see her as very self-absorbed, and she is, but she's not selfish, and that is probably what she is. There's certainly a selfish side to her, but she isn't selfish as such. I think she's probably mistaken for that a lot of the time. It's not to say that she's not, a philanthropist. She's not highly idealistic, but there are times when she feels like she needs to help and to give. There's a lot of love there to give, but not in a physical, sexual sense. She's not, um, there's not a strong energy about her in that way. It's more creative. The art of the headline shows someone who's creative. Obviously, like kind of goes without saying, the lunar mount as well being so well developed. The drooping of that headline goes those imaginative thoughts. So this almost kind of erratic, impulsive behavior shows that giving in a very creative way. I think the perfect kind of partner would be someone who is for Beyonce, would be someone who is highly analytical and or practical. Now, I've mentioned several hand types throughout this video already: intuitive, egocentric, practical, and analytical. If you want to know what I mean about, more about what I mean when I mention those hand types, please look at my blog on my website, the 12 type hand classification method, and I've described quite comprehensively what I mean by each of those. If you're wondering, by the way, what this kind of leaning in of the Saturn fingertip, it's on the right hand and right hand only. If we saw it on the left hand, it'd be a fairly worrying sign because it would show that somehow her psychology, her ethics, and her morals have been um, corrupted. But it's on the right hand, so it's a very different thing. It's showing that her societal contribution depends on her creativity and her talents. She is extremely health conscious and worried about that. I've mentioned that I don't really see anxiety and I don't, but she certainly is constantly thinking about her health. This is the left hand, very internal, and this is a health line. Now, as I've mentioned at the beginning of this reading, I'm not really going to be able to predict all that much because I just don't have um, the clarity here, the ingredients for divination or forecasting. But I will say there is a decision to, to stop working very soon, I believe, on the horizon, maybe even next year for Beyonce. She's 43. That's quite literally all I know about her. Um, other than what I've explained in this reading from her hands alone. But notice the fate line here. It appears to stop at a second sort of headline. This is a decision that she's making to end her career. It could be that she makes a choice or a decision that somehow impacts her ability to continue in her career on her kind of chosen path. I'm wondering if there's some sort of fear there that she can't continue. So that's interesting. Let's see what happens there. Let's see what happens because it looks to me about the age, it looks actually 43. That's what it looks like to me, something like that. It's just so faint. I wish I could have gotten better pictures. And at the age of 65, she seems to be, very worried about that kind of age in terms of health. So that really is all I'm gonna say here because there's not really anything else I can say that has any, profound kind of meaning. Let me know what your thoughts are on this palm reading, if you've learned anything. If you have disagreed with anything I've said, maybe you've picked up on something that I haven't. Let me know who you'd like me to read the hands of next Sunday. And thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.